Okay, so Gabe, congratulations on everything that's going on. We have a lot to talk about, so I'm just going to jump right into it. It's been a while.
Sure.
I haven't seen, I mean, it's twice in 1 week. How lucky am I, right?
I know,
So-
right? It's
So look,
brought us
you
together.
wrote, that's for sure. So you wrote this great script for a new movie, which is really pissing Trump off, called The Apprentice. And
Yep.
in this new movie, you explore Trump's rise to prominence long before his presidency.
Yeah.
Which specific events or deals from his business career do you think played the most pivotal role in shaping his public persona? And how do you think that these influence his political trajectory?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Michael. It's great to be here. The film is called The Apprentice. It opens in theaters on Friday, October 11th. And really, the movie covers the years 1973 to 1987. The movie chronicles Donald Trump's relationship with his mentor, the right-wing lawyer and fixer Roy Cohn. And it shows how Donald Trump learned Roy Cohn's lessons to develop the scorched earth, lie at any cost politics that we all see today. The movie chronicles his early deals. So it starts with the Grand Hyatt Hotel, next to Grand Central Terminal in Manhattan. It then follows his development of Trump Tower, and then into his disastrous foray into Atlantic City, where he overbuilt and overborrowed and went bankrupt. And it ends before his bankruptcy, but we see how all of this deal making was getting over his head. And I think if you want to explain what deals made him like the Donald Trump we recognize today, I think really it's his post-Trump Tower deals, where it was really just a house of cards. He was over borrowing, over leveraging. His first two deals, if he had stopped with those, he would have been a successful developer. But his greed and his ego got in the way, and that's where he set himself up for the bankruptcies.
Yeah, well, very, very true. Let me just tell you, first of all, I was honored that you and Tom Ortenberg, who is the financier of the movie, reached out to me and asked me if I would come to the premiere. It appears that, my comments about how Donald will hate this movie, in fact, become the number one trending thing on Daily Beast and in a whole bunch of the different media outlets that were there. But I'll tell you what I didn't know when I accepted the invitation to come to the premiere is exactly who initially was in the movie. And then when I had a chance to meet Sebastian Straw there, and Jeremy Strong, and Maria Bakalova, and Martin
Donovan.
Martin Donovan. Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, what a cast. And not only is the movie funny in certain respects, I mean, it's comical in certain ways. I got to tell
terrifying
you,
in certain ways.
It is terrifying, but Sebastian is just absolutely incredible in the portrayal of Donald. There are so many things that I have questions I have to ask you, but also Jeremy Strong, his playing of Roy Cohn was just spectacular. Absolutely spectacular.
Yeah.
How did you get the storyline to be where it was at?
Well, when I covered Trump's 2016 presidential campaign for New York Magazine, I still am a political journalist in addition to screenwriting. When I covered the campaign, a lot of people around Trump, including Roger Stone and others, were telling me things like he's, using the lessons Roy Cohn taught him, or he sounds a lot like Roy Cohn. And so it came to me in a flash. I was like, you know what? There's a movie in that how this closeted right-wing lawyer with a creepy frog collection and notorious for blackmail and extortion. Really, he's an outlaw criminal lawyer in a certain way. People say that Roy Cohn was a lawyer who hated the law. And that's, I think, in many ways, Donald learned those lessons. I thought there's a movie in how this person created the Donald Trump we know today. And so I set about doing the research. And, what I learned is that, at the end of Roy's life, when he was dying of AIDS in the mid 1980s, Donald, who, of course, as you know this, Michael, he's a germaphobe. and was paranoid about getting AIDS. And he basically abandoned Roy Cohn. And Roy was totally heartbroken. He had devoted himself to training Donald. And there's this quote I read that I was totally chilled by. And it was something like, Roy said near the end of his life, "I can't believe Donald is abandoning me. He pisses ice water." And I thought, Roy Cohn is known as one of the most ruthless people of the 20th century. And if he thought Donald was worse than himself, what does that say about Donald? So I wanted the movie to chronicle that relationship, and not in a way that's a cartoon. I mean, I tried to write characters that feel like real people, that you spend time with them, you're like, these seem like not just two-dimensional Saturday Night Live impressions. And but I wanted the audience to see that at the end of the film, Donald has learned everything from his mentor, and now the apprentice just cuts him loose. And I think obviously you, as much of anyone, Michael, has known that Donald at the end has no loyalty to anybody. And so I think that the movie is a character study of how does somebody become a person like Donald Trump.
I mean, interesting. I wanted to ask you, as I was watching the movie, and I was fortunate, to also be able to bring my wife and my son there. When he brings Roy to the house for Roy's birthday,
yeah,
and he's making a speech about Roy, where he's the most vicious, he's the most ruthless, blah, blah, blah. Where did that information come from? How did you learn about that specific line, the statements that he made, the words that he used? How did you come across that?
Well, the movie's a dramatization, right? It's not a documentary. It's not journalism. So I know that there was a dinner that Donald and Ivana hosted for Roy shortly before he died at Mar-a-Lago. They hosted a dinner at Mar-a-Lago shortly before Roy died. And I know that Donald has in other places called Roy, vicious and a killer. And so, I don't know the actual speech he gave in real life. This was, my dramatic and creative license. But I do know that, Donald, when he talks about other people, it always circles back to himself. Once his ego is out of the control, he had no real ability to talk and really share attention with anybody else. And I thought that scene near the end of the film was a way for Roy to realize that Donald only cares about himself.
The reason why I ask you that specific question is while we were watching the movie in that scene, both my wife and my son looked at me and I looked at them. It was fucking exact to what Donald said about me
Wow.
at my son's bar mitzvah.
Holy shit.
I asked Donald, it was, if I show you the clip
That's
of
scary.
Donald at my son's bar mitzvah, he turns around and he says, because I brought him up and he was making a speech, and he turns around and he goes, "Jake," it's my son, "you don't really know you don't know your real father." And everybody starts giggling, and there's like 260, 270 people. It's a big fucking bar mitzvah, at the Mandarin Oriental. And he turns around and he goes, "Your father is the most vicious asshole anybody has ever had to deal with." I say, he destroys people on a daily basis. It was as if you somehow got a hold of my son's bar mitzvah video and you just used the exact verbiage, the exact words, when you vicious, ruthless, and so on. But then he turned around and he said at the end, "But he's my vicious asshole." He goes, "And I love him," and so on. And it was crazy like that. And
Wow.
we all looked at each other and we were like, "Oh my God, Gabe has nailed this thing." It's not like it was an over dramatization, right? In order to prove some sort of a point that the left would like, a point that the right would like. It's pretty factually fucking accurate. I mean, other than knowing that Sebastian is not Donald Trump, he played him perfectly. and the verbiage, the language, the
Yeah.
intonations, the shoulder,
Wow.
the head movement, it was spot on. I
I
mean,
know.
I always liked
That was,
him as an actor, but now I'm just like a major fan.
yeah, no, he pulled something off that's almost impossible, which is to play Donald as a real character. There's so many impressions of Donald on the internet and comedians poking fun at Donald, but there's never been an actor who's actually tried to play him as a real person. And I don't know how Sebastian does it. I'm not an actor, obviously, so he just figured it out how to. I felt like when I was on set and we were filming that I was with Donald. When you're with, obviously, you've spent more time than almost anybody with Donald. He has this way of commanding space, and especially we were filming the scenes in the set that was Trump Tower, the office, and the way Donald leans back in his messy ass desk, and then he comes forward. And like Sebastian has never met Donald, to my knowledge, but he was able to become him, and it was pretty. It was. I had to like blink sometimes and be like, okay, no, Donald's not here. This is Sebastian doing it. But I want to ask you a question. Do you think you were filling the role that Roy Cohn played for Donald when you went to work for him?
100%. And in fact, I had actually met Roy when I was a young kid. I think like 15 years old or so. I was working at a place in Brooklyn called the El Carib, which was it's a beach club, and a lot of there were really two different groups of people that constituted the El Carib as a club. You had Jews that thought they were Italian gangsters, and then you had the Italian gangsters that were there. Yeah. You had basically every family was represented there, but by a lot of people. And Roy would come there on several occasions, not like every weekend because they had this massive pools and stuff like that, but he was there on a handful of occasions over the years that I had worked there. I write actually about it in my book, Disloyal, that I saw a guy get shot in the ass in the pool because he was drunk and he took his bathing suit off. There must have been 2,000 people in the pool. I'm not exaggerating. There must have been like 2,000 people. It was a massive, massive double Olympic-sized swimming pool. And but that's where I had a chance to meet for the one or two times Roy Cohn. And he was interesting because he wasn't this he's not a big guy at all.
No.
But he was short. But rather he commanded so much attention so that when he would walk, I mean, these guys who were made, capos and soldiers and so on in various different families, they were behind him to the side, everybody trying to get a minute of his attention. And I just thought it was truly an incredible thing. And again, Jeremy played him brilliantly. But I want to ask you this because the movie really truly sheds light on Trump's business failures, which as well as anybody, he often hides behind his media-created image of success, right? And massive success. Could you share some of the most, let's say, shocking or underreported failures that you uncovered during the making of the movie, during the writing of the script, and how they reveal the contrast between Trump's public image and reality?
I mean, I think what I learned in the research of this movie is that there are sort of two chapters of Donald Trump's business career. There's the first two deals he did, the Grand Hyatt and Trump Tower. If he had stopped with those deals, he would have been a successful real estate developer. They were both successful, well-executed projects. But what happened was that he got consumed with his own ego, and he started to believe his own myth that he is this golden touch for deal making. And as the movie shows, I also believe he was hooked on amphetamine diet pills, which make people have kind of manic energy. And he went on a spending spree from about 1985 to 89. The movie ends in 87, but we cover all this. He buys all the Trump Castle in Atlantic City. He starts to build the Taj Mahal, over $1 billion, completely overspending on that casino. He buys the airline, the Trump yacht, the Princess, Mar-a-Lago, of course, he buys. And I think, all of his business deals post Trump Tower really kind of ended up falling apart. The only thing he was good at, the only business he ended up being good at after Trump Tower, was promoting himself as a media figure. And for the rest of his life, he was just trading off of the Trump name. He was not building real classy and successful developers. And so I think hopefully the movie sheds light on the fact that, like, after Trump Tower, it basically became all a mirage. It's all an image. It's not real. There's nothing behind, underneath of it. It's he's just promoting this image of success, not actual success. And also the movie shows, and this is important, that his father bails him out. And he was so desperate for money near the end of the movie, and this is based on a real event, that he tried to swindle the family trust out of his father's hands while his father was suffering Alzheimer's. He tried to, dupe a demented old man into giving him the family money. I mean, what does that say about a person's moral compass?
But he actually did accomplish something like that, because we've seen, Mary Trump talk about it, Robert Trump, talk about how, he fucked the whole family, out of their money. In fact, I remember at one point in time, Judge Barry, Marion Barry, who had a house directly across the street from Mar-a-Lago, turned around and said, with all the stuff and bullshit that Donald went after the presidency, by the way, and she wanted, to sell the house. It was no longer needed by her. She demanded that he buy it. And, one of the issues, of course, was, how, that she wanted her price, considering he fucked them all out of money, and Mary Trump talks about it probably more and better than anybody.
No, I read her book very closely. I mean, she obviously, the way the family treated Freddie is also a storyline in the book. Mary Trump's father was Freddie Trump, the firstborn son, who Fred Trump, the patriarch of the family, wanted to take over the business. But, Freddie realized that, this is a family of psychopaths, and he wanted to become an airline pilot and follow his dream of flying. And so Freddie, didn't do he got out of the family business. He became an airline pilot for TWA. But, his way of coping with Fred Trump's his oppressive father was he turned to drinking. And basically, the way Donald and his father turned their back on Freddie led to Freddie's death. And I think he's sort of one of the tragic characters of this story. That the values of, when you go through the world thinking like Donald does, that there's only killers and losers, anyone who doesn't play by those rules, Donald completely just has no respect for.
Yeah. But in the movie, you have, on the moment that Fred was dying, I forget where you had Donald at. I don't recall. Where was Donald at, according to the movie? Because my understanding is when Fred was in the hospital and dying of, I guess, alcoholism,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Donald was at the movies.
Yes. No, of course. That was in an earlier version of the script. Yeah, there's a very famous scene that, Freddie had a heart attack and was sent to the hospital, was fighting for his life. And the Trump family gathered at the family house in Jamaica Estates, Queens. And Donald gets bored after a short while and says, "Screw this, I'm going to the movies." And basically went to the movies while, his brother died in the hospital. That was in an earlier version of the script, but we had only a certain amount of space, so it ended up not making the final version of the movie. But no, I know that story very well, and I think it speaks a lot.
Speaks volumes, right? For his character, his morality, his empathy, his love, even for his own family. See, he never really, he'll tell you how much he loved his father. It wasn't his father that he loved. It was the name, the money, and the power. That people don't realize how rich Fred Trump actually was. I mean, Fred
Yeah.
Trump was really like one of the first, what they call centimillionaires,
Yeah.
worth well in excess of hundreds of
Hundreds of
millions of
millions.
dollars.
Yeah. Back
Hundreds
when
of
that meant
millions.
something. That meant a
Oh,
lot. I mean,
yeah.
he was a billionaire, in today's dollars for sure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, because Trump's persona, right, is larger than life. I mean, we have to acknowledge certain things, right? That he has a larger than life persona,
Of
both on
course.
television as well as now in politics. What were the specific challenges that you encountered in portraying this persona accurately in the movie The Apprentice? Did you find it difficult to balance his real life characteristics with powerful figures like Roy Cohn? And how do you prevent it from kind of making the more exaggerated
Mhm.
media created image?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think what this movie tries to do is to show the evolution of a character and how somebody like Donald Trump can lose their humanity and become just a media creation. So when we meet Donald Trump at the beginning of the film, played by Sebastian Stan, it's 1973, and he's relatively soft-spoken. He's insecure. He's stiff. He's awkward. And it's only as the movie progresses and Donald learns Roy Cohn's lessons and gets more power that we start to see the version of Trump that we now know today. He starts to become, this media creation. And so when the film ends in 1987, we recognize that Donald has become not really a human anymore, that he's just playing a character of himself. And I think that's one of the problems, is that with Trump today as a president, or, hope he's trying to become the president, is that he doesn't even know who he is anymore. He's been playing, quote, Donald Trump for so many years that he's not a real person. He doesn't feel emotions like we do. And so that's, I think, what ultimately makes him a very dangerous person to be president.
On this podcast, I've had twice already, and I actually will speak to him every now and then, Dave Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave Marcus is the cousin of Roy Cohn,
right.
with probably the best. I mean, he probably has the greatest insight into Roy Cohn of really anybody that's out there. Now, Roy,
I'm very flattered, because Dave Marcus wrote an article for the Forward newspaper saying how accurate the film was in representing his cousin.
Well, thanks for taking away what I was just going to say. But yes, it's fantastic, and that's why at the very beginning of this program, I was saying you hit the stuff remarkably. I mean, this is not. I don't want people to think when they go to see the movie, and I give it a 5 thumbs up. On wanting to and should seeing this movie. It really opens up your eyes. For me, it was a little painful, to be honest, because I felt like I was there. I knew all the games. I knew I knew the playbook that was being played throughout your movie, and it's remarkable. It is not what Trump's team, like a Stephen Chung, wants to tell you that it is. This is a liberal left-wing movie that is disparaging to Trump simply to make money. This fucking movie, dude, is spot on, including so much of the verbiage that you didn't even know, like what I was saying, the way he described me is identical to the way you have him describing Roy. I can't wait to clip that and send it to you privately. It will blow your freaking mind. All right. But which kind of brings you. So, like I said, this is a movie that people not only should see, must see, especially before November 5th. But the real question I want to ask you, so having covered Trump for years, and I remember during the election, the 2015, 2016, I think you and I probably spoke, I don't know, almost at least twice a week, if not more. Look, let's be clear. Your schedule is busy, and sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously, or you hope. I mean, you don't have the time to go to doctor's office and get treated for things like ED. Through HIMS, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. HIMS is changing men's health care by providing access to affordable sexual health treatments, all from the comfort of your couch. HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments such as chewable hard mints, proven treatments like Viagra and Cialis or their generics for up to 95% cheaper. You hear that? 95% cheaper. And the process is simple, and it's 100% online. There's no uncomfortable doctor visits. Just answer a series of questions on their website, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. And if prescribed your medication, well, it ships directly to you for free. And no insurance is needed. You pay one low price for your treatments, online visits, ongoing shipments, and provider messaging. HIMS has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers. So if ED is getting you down, it's time you find the option that works right for you. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/Cohen. That's HIMS.com/Cohen for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/Cohen. And the products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required, and price varies based on product and subscription plan.
Well, and
right?
you know, my first job in journalism was covering Manhattan real estate for the New York Observer, long before Jared Kushner bought the paper, right after 9/11. And I was covering Trump, more than 20 years ago. So I have this long, this weird history with him, where I saw him as just a tabloid. At first he was a New York tabloid character. And then in 2016, he became something totally different.
Yeah, which is, again, spot on. But so having covered Trump for as many years as you've had, did working on and writing this script for The Apprentice offer you new insight into his psychological makeup or his approach to power and his desire for ultimate power? And tell me, how does the film illuminate Trump's decision-making process or his view of loyalty, both in business, politics, and also personal? Because as we were just talking about how he had no loyalty even to his own family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think we have so much information about Trump. Where every day it's cable news and social media and the internet. I think what this movie did for me was make me feel, when I was writing, I felt kind of this emotional experience of what is it like to be, around somebody like Trump. What does a narcissist do to the people in his life? And I think that's what the movie does is, while we know so much about Trump, seeing him do these things to people that are in his life and actually seeing an actor like Sebastian, who's so convincing, I think it makes the audience we all have to reckon with the fact that this is the man that could be the president. And so I think there's an impact that this film has that's different than journalism because it's art. It sort of hits you in the gut in a way that sometimes we read things and we're like, wow, okay, there he goes again. That was sort of my feeling.
Yep. Well, while watching the movie, one thing that actually jumped out at me was the way that you wrote the script to address the broader cultural and political shifts that were taking place in the 80s and the 90s, the AIDS epidemic, the homelessness, that whole aspect of political and cultural shifts, but these shifts that allowed somebody like Trump, somebody who, again, was so devoid of initially any self-respect, right? I mean, he really was awkward and he had no faith even in himself, to ascend to significant fame and eventually to use that to run for office. So the question I really want to ask you is, how do you think that the film frames Trump's success in the context of these larger societal trends?
Well, that's also a great question. I think,
Well, we try.
Unfortunately, Donald is a product of a system as much as he is. This movie is about his relationship with Roy Cohn, of course, but it's also about this system and capitalism that rewarded a personality like Donald and the media. And I put, myself in that camp. I think the media wrote about Trump as this kind of funny, charismatic, ridiculous tabloid figure. And we didn't realize the darkness that was underneath. And there's this scene in the film where Trump is doing an interview with the New York Times and Roy Cohn is kind of coaching him. But anyways, there's a later scene when his mother, Mary Trump, is reading the article and she's so happy. And the article compared Trump to Robert Redford and how, handsome he was. That's literally just a cut and paste from the New York Times profile of Donald in 1976. They helped build up the myth of Trump as this successful real estate developer. So I think what the movie shows is that we're all kind of complicit in the creation of this persona that Trump became, because he took advantage of the media and the culture of money and power. In the 80s, really, Manhattan became a city that was just defined by money, and Trump kind of represented that. So I think, the media kind of, and again, I'm putting myself in this because, when I was writing about Trump in the real estate business in the early 2000s, I would gossip with him. He would be a source of mine. I could call his office and 10 minutes later, Rona Graff would say, "Okay, I have Mr. Trump for you." So I feel like the media was also responsible for creating him.
But was it Rona that was there at the time, or at the time was really Norma Federer who was there? Rona.
Well, in the movie, it was Norma,
right?
But I was talking about in the 2000s when I was reporting on Donald.
Yeah, in 2000s it was Norma, but in the 80s, all the way actually up to 2000 and five or so, it really was Norma until she ultimately retired. Norma was an interesting character as well. Rona's interesting in her own right, but Norma is more like a Roy Cohn, right? Executive secretary. She ran his book like Roy Cohn would run a lawsuit. I will tell you what I thought, again, that you nailed just so incredibly was your portrayal of Trump's lack of giving a shit about violating norms, laws, sense of right and wrong. There were several times throughout my tenure with Trump, and don't forget, I was with him for almost a decade and a half, where he would say, "You're my Roy." And I think you'll find this incredibly interesting. And if I can give you just one example, when I remember him turning around and saying, "That's what my Roy would do," right?
Wow.
And so on. When Donald got this note that he was being placed into the CNBC poll of the most important and influential business people or leaders in the world, he had this innate need, this fervent need, this desire, this definitive desire to be top of that list. This was his id, his ego, his super ego, all smashed into one big fucking narcissistic sociopathy, right? Of his need to, with this fucking fakakta poll, this poll by CNBC that meant absolutely nothing, because he was somehow included in it and knew several of the individuals that were also being named. He needed to have it. And when he found out of like the 200 people that he was like number 197, that made him blow a fucking gasket, where he circled it, he sent it to my office by Rona, and it says, Michael, see me immediately. And so I walk in, and he didn't hand me papers. So I would sit in my red velvet chair, and you had the chairs there, right? But you had them in white. They were always in red. By the way, the desk in his office was not facing that direction. It actually,
of course, that was the set that we had. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, understood. Just I wanted just to let you know. Other than that, the office was pretty identical, from the Shalom sign with the chauffeur and everything, all the way to pictures.
The sports memorabilia. Yeah,
100%. But when I turned around and I said, I may have a solution for you, and he goes, tell me. And I said to him, there's something called algorithms. And by the way, he had no fucking clue what I was talking about, nor was he really listening, other than to the part when I said to him, by manipulating the algorithms, we will be able to make you into a top 10. And he wanted to be number 1. And I said to him, number one would look really bad, because there'll be a second half to this. Then we can be number 1 or number 2, which, by the way, when you're up against some of the leaders that they're talking about here, like Nelson Mandela, right? I mean, understand, right, that, you're in a phenomenal group of people. And he was like, number 9. And he perched his lips like if somebody, made him suck on a lemon and farted in his face, that look, and again, Sebastian fucking killed it with the perching of the lip.
Yeah.
And then he goes, make it happen. He goes, do it. Let you and let me know. Keep me up to date. And when I was able to pull that off, he was like, fucking amazing. Of course, we still fucked over, and he fucked me over, and and the company that I used in order to.
You had the Liberty University guy.
Yeah, Redfinch.
Redfinch. Yeah.
This was to me when he said to me, "That's my Roy."
Wow.
And I didn't fully understand the depth of that comment by Trump, which I should have taken as a major compliment. I always knew that Roy was his sort of shifty, shady guy, but I didn't understand the actual affection that Trump really had for him, especially early on, until he ultimately decided that the student now has to teach the teacher. Mm-hmm. And your movie really shows that well.
There's also something I want to talk about, because, I wrote the screenplay in 2017 and the early part of 2018. And in one of the scenes, Roy is teaching young Donald the rules of success. And the first rule is always attack. The second rule is deny everything, admit nothing. And the third rule is always claim victory, never admit defeat. And I wrote that in 2018, and I had no idea that, Trump would try to overthrow the election and stage, January 6th. But I remember, what I'm saying is the movie, when he did these things, I was like, holy shit, like he's just doing the things that I had written about 2 years earlier. But I remember that testimony where you said Donald Trump won't leave office peacefully. And that is, I think that's a sign that he was just following Roy's rules, never admit defeat. And, it's, it nearly brought down the country.
Yeah, well, my exact words is my biggest fear is that if Donald Trump loses the election in 2020, there will never be a peaceful transfer of power. And I knew it only because being shoulder to shoulder with the guy,
Yeah.
protecting him, watching his
Mhm.
back, like the way you portray Roy Cohn early on. Donald always needed a Roy Cohn his whole life. And that's why I guess he took a fancy to me because he saw that I had the ability within which to manipulate reporters, to use tabloid gossip as we did with the National Enquirer into shaping him, his brand, and all for preparation to him take the political stage. And again, your movie just knocks it out of the park on that. But let me then ask you this then. Given your deep knowledge of Trump's life, what do you hope that viewers of the movie The Apprentice will understand about the origins of his business career that they may have missed or didn't know before? I mean,
Mhm.
what do you say are the key takeaways from his
Mhm.
early business ventures that foreshadow the kind of president that he was, and worse, the president that he could become again?
Mhm. Well, a couple things. Number one, I think Roy Cohn taught Donald that it's okay to use corruption and break the law to get what you want. And Donald Trump got a $400 million tax abatement to build the Hyatt Hotel, the Grand Hyatt, um, at Grand Central when he remodeled the Commodore. And no other developer of those years got that. Harry Helmsley, none of the Lafrax, the Spires, no one got that handout. And what Roy did was he manipulated City Hall and got Mayor Abe Beame to basically do a backroom deal to help Donald. So I think Donald really saw politics not as helping people. Donald saw politics as a way to help himself. And I think that's what this movie does. Obviously that's been covered in the press, but we see it acted out in a dramatic way, how Donald was using government to enrich himself. And I think, if he becomes president again, look at all the business deals that, Trump did, the Trump Hotel in DC, which he's now sold. Foreign governments were spending money trying to influence him. And I think Donald is very easily to be influenced if you give him money. And I think that's what kind of the movie reveals, that Donald Trump's not about building a business because he has a better idea, or it's about who do I have to kind of pay off to get what I want.
It's not just the money, by the way. It's also the flattery, the
Yeah.
self-adulation for Trump, which again, the movie demonstrates quite a bit. The adulation that people give to him, for him, it's like oxygen. He needs that shit to breathe. I mean, that's why all these people that are around him, these sycophantic, these acolytes, they are, you're feeding the beast, so to speak. So I want to just jump and turn, for the remainder of the show. I want to talk really about more like what's happening politically now, right?
Yeah,
And
sure.
use that as sort of as where the movie, kind of leaves off, because right now Trump is flailing and Kamala Harris is surging in the polls as we, are now within the final month of the election. What do you think has driven her momentum? And do you see any parallels to how Trump captured the public's imagination in 2016?
Hmm. Well, I think, clearly she's she's sane. She can, speak coherently. Donald, the New York Times had a fascinating piece the other day about Donald's speeches are becoming, even by his standards, more and more unhinged. And I think, he's showing his age, and the contrast between, Kamala Harris, who's 59, and Donald Trump, who's 78. He'll be the oldest president ever elected. I think that's clearly part of it. I've always wondered, you know, if Donald would suffer a fate similar to Roy, because Roy Cohn rose to the pinnacle of American power and influence, and yet he died completely in disgrace. He was disbarred by the New York Bar Association, and he was pursued by the FBI and the IRS for $7 million of tax evasion. And he basically died broke and in disgraced. And I've always wondered if Donald would suffer. It looked like a moment in 2021, 22, when all these indictments were coming down, that Donald Trump was going to end up like Roy, basically just hounded by the law but I think he's there's something about Donald that you can't ever. He's like the monster in the horror movie that just will refuse to die. His political longevity, I think, has surprised me. And I think the race is close, and the national polls clearly favor Kamala. What I do worry about, though, politically, Michael, is that if you look at the swing state polls, they're much closer. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, particularly, are, I think those states are must wins for her. And so I'm not predicting. I think this thing will be decided on Tuesday in November, and I worry, like you said, if he doesn't win, he's not going to accept the result, right?
So he will definitely not accept it. Let me be very clear. And I think he loses by a bigger margin than what you think. I believe Pennsylvania will be called early in the race because I believe that the people of Pennsylvania and you're talking about now the Black community of Pennsylvania and Gen Z. I think they fucking hate him. I think that they've gotten to a point right now that they're like, okay, look, enough is enough. And all he's doing is grifting on the same idiots again and again and again. And he's got those MAGAs locked up. But that MAGA is like 38% of the Republican Party, or 38% of the Republican electorate. It's far from enough within which to win the general election. Yeah, my feeling is that the same now applies with Michigan, where the unions are, I think it's like 26-3 in favor of Kamala Harris, right? And I think there's a lot of people who they just don't want to fight with their family members anymore.
It's exhausting.
It is exhausting. And then they say, you know what? I'm all in for Trump and so on. But then they get to the polls and they do the exact opposite, because the only person that knows is you and God, right? Who you voted for. Oh, I can't.
But in 2016, there was the secret Trump vote that went the other way, right? There were the people who,
way. And that's what I believe. But
I mean, they're. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I do not believe that Trump will accept the defeat. He will continue, because that's the grift. That's all he's got left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's selling the Bibles and the sneakers and the NFTs. I mean, it's like, what else can he put his name on?
$100,000 gold watch.
Yeah. Did you ever get the sense? And there's a scene in your book that reminded me a lot of the way Roy taught Donald to just break every rule. When you went down to that office, was it 40 Wall Street? And
at 40 Wall Street.
You basically
called Trump Mortgage. It was called Trump.
You guys
Mortgage.
were like gangsters. You just basically shut these guys down.
I walked in. It was like the mob. It was me, this guy named George, and Matt, and Donald. I wasn't even working for the company yet. I was outside counsel. I was at Phillips Nizer. He brought me in, and he goes, "Michael, only you can shut this shit down." And it was Trump Mortgage, run by this guy, E.J. Ridings, who right now is like a major, again, Trump fan, brought in by Don Jr., which is, of course, when Trump used to shit on Don and constantly say he is the worst fucking judgment of anyone I've ever met in my entire life. No, true.
Wow.
And he goes, you go in there and you shut this shit down and do it rough. So, meanwhile, I walk in and I ask for the password. The guy won't give it to me. And so we got it. And I basically went to each person that was working there and I told them that they need to just pack up their personal stuff and they need to leave because the company is shut down. And he was like, what
Yeah.
are you doing? And I had big man Matt, there, who's his former security. That's now his chief operating officer.
Isn't he the guy that Trump saw at the U.S. Open tackle the spectator? And Trump's like, I want that guy.
Yep. And he became his chief of security and then his bodyguard. And now he's elevated. By the way, Matt happens to be a bright guy, which just goes to show you that, Trump gave a guy an opportunity that he never would have been able to. And he actually, he excels in it. Look, Matt and I haven't spoken in years, obviously, and he is a true Trump loyalist. But what he does very well, including shake people down. He is a great CEO shakedown artist across the board. But I want to move on. I want to just ask you because, obviously the country is dealing with a lot of hurricanes right now, specifically Hurricane Milton, really exposed, the disaster response that this country has. And one of the things that you see is Trump attempting to interpret or to frame the response as unsuccessful, despite the fact that the worst FEMA response in history was by and during Trump's administration, specifically with Hurricane Harvey in Texas, as well as his shit response to the wildfire that took place in California. Today's episode is brought to you by Ollie. Clean, fresh nutrition your dog needs in 5 flavors that they'll absolutely flip over. You don't have to be a veterinary nutritionist to know that feeding your dog real, whole foods with minimal processing is one of the best choices that you can make for their health. A perfectly portioned, whole fresh food diet has been proven to extend your pup's life by 2.5 years. And who doesn't want more time with their best friend? With absolutely no harmful fillers, no preservatives, Ollie is made in U.S. kitchens with ingredients carefully sourced from trusted growers and producers around the world. You see, because the time between Ollie's gentle cooking and your dog's chowing down is minimal, they don't need preservatives to extend shelf life. With 5 protein-first recipes like fresh beef with sweet potatoes, fresh turkey with blueberries, or fresh lamb with cranberries, you might start thinking, damn, my dog eats better than I do. And that's probably true when it comes to Ollie. So I want to be clear about something. I actually don't have a pet. I don't have a dog, but I do have a neighbor who has the absolute cutest cavapoo that goes crazy for me whenever she sees me. And by the way, her name is Luna. So here's what you need to do. First thing that you do is you fill out Ollie's 30-second quiz, and they'll create a customized meal plan based on your pup's weight, the activity level, and other health information. Ollie crunches the numbers, and then they recommend the right recipe and the daily portions for your precious pup based on hundreds of thousands of real dog results. Now, for the first-time users, Ollie will send out your pup's first box with 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks worth of meals and a guide on how to gradually switch them over to their new diet. Ollie offers 3 meal plans to choose from. You really think that this is for a human? They offer 3 meal plans to choose from. So you can choose between a full fresh plan, fresh topper plan, or a mixed plan with their freshly baked recipes for your special fur puppy. They also have treats and supplements. So look, like I said, I don't have a pup, but I promise you that your dog will love it. In fact, I have a video of Luna chowing down the very first day that I brought it over to their apartment. So let me be clear now. Ollie, they are offering a deal to let your pup taste test a personalized meal plan. So head right now to Ollie.com and tell them all about your dog and use Cohen, and you'll get 60% off your first box of meals when you subscribe today. So head to Ollie, that's OLLIE.com, and enter code Cohen, that's me, COHEN, to get 60% off your first box. Again, that's Ollie, OLLIE.com, and enter Cohen to get 60% off your first box. And they offer a clean bowl guarantee on their first box. So if you're not completely satisfied, you get your money back. When he didn't want to give any money because California is not his state. They vote Democrat. All right. This is something, again, that the movie sort of brings out, not of course in these exact scenarios, but where Roy was always teaching him no mercy. You think that it was Roy who taught him no mercy, or do you think he's just born without that gene?
Well, clearly Roy was a huge influence, and I think his father, Fred, was a big influence. Fred Trump was a rough guy. He was ruthless in his own right, and a racist. And I think Donald, learned, some of his personality from his father. But no, Roy, I think, taught Donald that there is, to get what you want, you can't hold back. And it reminded me of also what you were saying about his response to COVID, that Donald was not helping certain states that were blue states because he's like, they didn't vote for me. And I think that's, we need a president who's going to be the president for all Americans, not just his fans.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, now talk about, again, one of the other issues, and I'm so fascinated by the movie because there's so much truism in there. One of the things that the movie also shows, and seriously, Gabe, when I say to you, well done, I really mean it. Well fucking done. You really show Trump's inability to acknowledge reality. That's not something I think that Roy taught him. I think he taught him how to use his inability to understand reality. Remember the whole scene that you produce where he's like, I can do this, and I alone can do it. And so even though it really wasn't him who was doing it, it was really Roy pulling strings behind. But you've heard that Donald is now planning on renting out Madison Square Garden. And he's renting, they just rented out Madison Square Garden sometime for this month, of course, in an effort, in his opinion, he believes that he can flip New York red. You think that do you think this is a symbolic stunt or a legitimate strategy? And also, what does it say about his influence right now in traditionally blue states based upon the lies and the divisive rhetoric that he keeps spewing?
Well, I mean, I think Trump is, obviously New York is not going to vote for him, but, he's thinking that, Nassau County and upstate, working class people will fall for the MAGA bullshit. But no, I mean, from all the polls I read, it doesn't look like New York is realistically, a purple state. It's a blue state, but obviously it's going to get a lot of media attention, and even just going to MSG is going to, create a news cycle that he can use.
100%. And that's part of the Roy Cohn methodology, right? Figure out how you can take something which is really a negative, because his handling of FEMA, his handling of COVID, his handling of these significant disasters, right, were just pathetic. And what does he do? He's flipping the switch now. He's deflecting and saying that this Biden administration, it is the worst, that Biden is the worst president in history, when it has already been at least polled nationally that people believe that Donald Trump, not just nationally, but internationally, that Donald Trump is the worst president ever to sit in the Oval Office. He's the worst American president in history. And that's, that's a hell of a lack of an endorsement, right?
I know. Here's a question, though, I've been thinking about. Do you think, because the movie, I mean, I argue in the film that, the character that I wrote is a very lonely character. I mean, he doesn't have really any real personal friends. He has business associates. But do you think Donald actually has any real relationships, or is it completely transactional?
No, I think everything is transactional. I used to believe, and falsely so, that he actually considered me at one point in time
Hmm.
a friend, not just an employee, but also
Yeah.
a friend. Um, Boy, was I fooling, I guess, myself. Or maybe that is the closest that he can ever have to a friendship. One thing that's very interesting is, and the movie tries to portray it, where he tries to hold himself out as a ladies' man, always. But if you notice, throughout the entire history of Donald Trump, there are no women who come out and say, hey, I dated Donald in
Yeah.
junior high school,
No.
right? I dated Donald in high school. He took me to the prom, right? Or when he ultimately finished at Wharton, they always have these celebrations. They have these balls, these banquets, right? Who did Donald take to the banquet? The answer is nobody. None of these people are out there talking about their friendship, their relationships with Donald throughout any of his formative years. He doesn't even, that's why I laugh so much when I hear the media talking about, oh, his old friend Roger Stone. They're not friends. In fact, if they're friends, it's some of the nastiest. I've heard some of the nastiest stories and some of the nastiest things said about Roger Stone by Donald, right? Which far exceeds anything that any of the media has portrayed Roger Stone as, and they portray him in a pretty negative light. So to
Hmm.
answer your
Wow.
question, it is always transactional.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
I find that very sad in one respect, and in the other, it certainly explains his lack of empathy and his lack of more morality or decency, because the only person he really truly gives a shit about
Is
is
himself.
himself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So look,
Yeah.
Gabe, as the hour goes by really, really quickly here on Mea
Yeah.
Culpa, I have one last question for you,
Sure.
right? Because I don't want people to forget what you really are. You're not a screenwriter, you're a journalist,
Mm.
right? And how many
Mhm.
years have you been a journalist? 20 what?
I mean, really, yeah, since 2002 or so. So yeah,
Yeah.
almost over 20 years.
Yeah.
Now you're making me
So
feel old.
yeah, well, listen, I've been practicing law. Well, I was practicing since 1991, so I know I'm old. As a journalist, how do you think that the media landscape has shifted in its treatment of Trump from his early days in the
Mhm.
public eye to now, especially with films like The Apprentice and the growing public scrutiny that he deals with every single day?
Well, look, I mean, clearly in the 80s and 90s, as I mentioned earlier, the media was complicit in promoting the Trump tabloid, you know, this fictional tabloid creation he was making. And I think in 2016, with CNN running the rallies unedited, no fact checking, newspapers not willing to say that Trump lies, I think Trump took advantage of the fact that the media acts, or at least tries, not perfect. Media screws up. We make mistakes. But the media generally tries to act in good faith. And Trump took advantage of that. And now I think there's less both sidisms that, you know, the big outlets, the media outlets are, look, I've been lucky to work for places like New York Magazine and now Vanity Fair, where they do let you sort of tell it as you see it and write the truth. I think the big newspapers and the TV networks are much more cautious, and they're getting to a place where they will call Trump, a liar or a racist. But definitely in 2016, the media didn't know how to cover him, and he took advantage of that.
Yeah. And again, like I can give you a dozen stories where he would say to me, yeah, that's my Roy. Like when
Yeah.
we fucked around with the National Enquirer, with the Ted Cruz, with his father,
The
with the Lee
Kennedy thing.
Harvey
Yeah.
Oswald, right?
Yeah.
And Ted Cruz's dad was a part of the killing of Kennedy, and then we did the others with Hillary Clinton, and
Yeah.
we did the one with Marco Rubio. All of this. He'd be like, this is this was so natural to him, and I didn't understand how it was so natural. After seeing the movie, it actually gave me a lot of insight into things that even I didn't know. So again, Gabe Sherman, well done.
Thank you,
The
Michael.
movie's fantastic. It's a definite recommendation, and great job in going out there and trolling him the other day by flying that airplane over there.
Which was one of your
at the
ideas,
rally.
though, too. Yeah, I think that was partly your idea.
It definitely is something that I said that they should do.
Yeah.
So anyway, Gabe, thank you so much for joining me on Mea Culpa.
Thank you.
Look forward to hearing from you more and seeing you and speaking to you. Any issues come up, you have my number. Feel free to call. And thank you once again for inviting me and letting me walk that red carpet. That was spectacular.
Thanks, Michael. Anytime.